All in Sports Network. We love sports.
It is Thursday, November 28th. Happy Thanksgiving for everybody. Hopefully you are spending your time with family. No political arguments, just sports arguments between houses divided maybe against as the Texas Longhorns and the Texas A&M Aggies face off for the first time in 13 years, and it's been the talk of the state. Every radio station I turn on, every TV station I turn on, the office chatter at the water cooler is all Texas A&M talk. It's been exciting.
It's more than that. It's the talk of the country. I mean, this is probably the biggest game of the weekend. It's for a berth to the SEC title game. A&M looking for their first berth since getting into the SEC. Texas looking for their first in their first year, which I think surpasses a lot of people's expectations regardless of schedule. And probably the biggest matchup in this rivalry's history, to be quite honest.
Yep, and this is your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns right here on All In Horns, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network. I'm Tanner Carlson. That's Jake Jimerson. We have a great show for you today. We're going to bring enemies into our territory. We're not going behind enemy lines quite yet, but we've got Ben Peck from All In Aggies, a crossover episode between All In Sports, and it's going to be a good time. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and bring him into the show. Ben, welcome. This is a safe place for now. I know who knows where this conversation is going to go, but no, we're excited to have you on, man. Thanks a lot.
Well, I appreciate it, man. Looking forward to it. I'm happy to be a part of the discourse on here and on some of those TV takes on Texas A&M. It's been so weird. I don't know. You guys probably feel the same way. Like the whole year you wondered, like, will it get to this point and will it mean what it could? And to see that it has, especially the way it worked out with the tiebreakers and A&M going down, but it's still meaning, a trip to the championship game for the Aggies. Just kind of wild the way it all worked out.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And before we get into that, any big Thanksgiving plans this week?
Nothing crazy. I'm going down to see my sister in Austin, actually, on Thursday. She's got, long story short, like my brother-in-law had like a knee surgery just to clean something up. So he's like, can't really move. So her in-laws, his parents are like coming to their house. And then she was like, listen, we can't like do anything. That's why they're coming over here. So you can just like sit on the couch if you want. So it's kind of a nice, easy, chill Thanksgiving of watching hopefully a lot of football and just maybe getting a little trash talking.
Yeah, for sure. And so we actually had this discussion on a previous episode, is that speaking of Thanksgiving, watching football, this game historically played on Thanksgiving Day.
Right.
It's been moved to Saturday since the renewal. What's your take on that? Do you feel like you would rather watch it on Thursday during Thanksgiving with all the hoopla and family, or would you rather things kind of be settled in by the weekend and then have a sit down and watch it on a Saturday?
I think in a perfect world, I don't mind it being Thanksgiving night. My only like real world counter to it is like the NFL has, completely taking over Thursday with like adding more games. I wouldn't want it to be upstaged by that. So in that sense, I'm glad it's Saturday. I could maybe see Friday, but I know that's kind of a weird day too for
the NFL's taking over Black Friday now.
That's
too.
True. And then, and you're shopping and doing all that. So I'm cool with it either way. I'm like personally relieved it's Saturday just because like I've had a heck of a week just leading up to this point. I need time to like kind of catch my breath a little bit and get ready for it. But I think if it was like the old back when it was played, if it was like, hey, there's 2 games during the day and Thursday night is pretty much wide open. I like that setup, but the way things have gone, I probably would prefer it Saturday, just, on the sort of designated college football day.
Yeah, that's kind of where I fall selfishly when I'm at my in-laws, who I love dearly. Their Thanksgiving does not revolve around football like mine did growing up. And we kind of trade off holidays every year. And so selfishly, I want it on Saturday so I can be alone. No one has to see that side of me, especially when a game like this magnitude with the stakes that are at hand. I'm glad that I'll be alone in my basement watching that. My wife will be upstairs, just probably praying that I don't break anything during the game.
Hey.
So it's a little bit safer environment, I think, for myself.
You and me both. Hey, you know what I've perfected that I've done? Because I had that dilemma too. I use like an empty like water bottle or like a plastic bottle that it's really good cathartic to be able to like you can smash it, you can throw it on something, it's not going to break, but it feels like you got like that release out.
And it's got the sound, the crunch
Yeah,
sound.
it's got the sound and like
yeah.
bam, but then like maybe someone in their room be like, "What's going on?" I'd be like, "I just threw it against the wall. It's fine. I needed to hit something or something, or my hand was going to get broken."
I like that idea. I've tried like a fidget toy during a game because I just get so worked up. And the problem is if you throw that, it breaks. So
Right, exactly.
I like the water bottle idea. I'll take that. And I'm curious to know, I don't know if you knew what the tiebreaker scenarios were Saturday right after the game. I know for me, when A&M lost, I was like, wow, they just run the game for Texas A&M. The game's not going to have the same meaning for both teams. And then I was really surprised, like 5-10 minutes later, I see, oh, it's still the same stakes that I was kind of thinking it was going to be. Did you know right away, or did you have to look it up? How was your Saturday night with that?
No,
loss?
I was the same. I went through some of the tiebreakers, but like basically, I guess I never factored in Ole Miss and Alabama losing. I did look at each of those individually, but it seemed like everything I saw to that point was, well, first of all, I think Texas, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think even before Auburn, A&M has ever had a path where they lose to Texas and they don't make it. So like every scenario I was looking at was in the scenario that A&M beats Texas on Saturday, and everything I looked at was basically if A&M loses to Auburn and it would just change, like, okay, Texas plays Georgia or Texas plays Bama, but A&M was always going to be behind those teams. But I guess I just didn't factor in that level of chaos. So because everything I looked at, once A&M fell in that 2-loss tier, they were always behind Georgia or Alabama or and then Texas would be a moot point potentially. And I think even Texas I looked at, and they would still be behind Texas. So yeah, I didn't think it would be. I couldn't cook up a scenario that I could envision. Like I said, I could have imagined those two games individually in a crazy world, not necessarily the way it played out. But yeah, I was surprised as you guys were. And apparently too, I'm told if they would have won against Auburn, I don't know if this is true, there was a scenario where they could be in regardless if they lose to Texas. Like they could have, that almost could have, or I think it was like they could be in if they lose to Texas and somebody loses this weekend, something like that. So it was like they even had a chance to make it in with a loss this Saturday if more chaos.
Yeah, there would have been.
I think like if Alabama lost to Auburn maybe or something.
Yeah, there would have had to have been some sort of tiebreaker in terms of the conference schedule or common opponent schedule or whatever that. There's so many 5 to 6 levels of tiebreakers that it's very easily to get lost in it. So let's go ahead and I wanted to get your take on A&M's kind of what the fan perspective has been. I think on the outside looking in, I think everybody is kind of accuses A&M of being slightly delusional just a little bit in terms of the success going into the season and whatnot. But feeling cheated, feeling slighted, is it fair the way the committee has treated A&M in terms of the feeling in College Station?
I think as far as the committee, I think it's felt fair. The one thing that I think was looming that is kind of a moot point to this point is, or at this point, was the idea of the scenario if Texas A&M, because they were, of all those, whatever it was, 6 teams that were like in the mix before last weekend, A&M was at the bottom of them. And so you kind of cooked up a scenario. Well, if they beat Texas, but they lose to whoever they lose to in the SEC championship game, and they're a 3-loss SEC team having come in into the Texas game as the lowest ranked 2-loss team. Again, this is all the hypotheticals.
Right.
Would there have been a world where they go to Atlanta, they lose, and they miss out on the playoff, especially if they miss out on a playoff to Texas, who they just beat the week before? And, and then Indiana kind of factored into that. Like, well, if you leave Indiana out, that kind of frees up a spot, and maybe Tennessee was the next lowest team. So it's like, okay, would Tennessee get the bump out, or would Texas fall? But would Texas really fall all the way from 3 to out?
Yeah,
Again, I don't know how you would keep Texas above A&M in that scenario, but you're really going to put them behind that seemed a little harsh. So I think Tennessee fans kind of breathed a sigh of relief. But just as far as the expectations coming into this year, I think everyone knew this was sort of it's kind of funny that like 2 years ago, I think they came in number 5 when they lost to App State and all that. And I didn't really feel, I know they were coming off the signing day and they beat Alabama the year before, 8-4 though, still a couple of disappointing losses in there, immensely talented. And it was one of those, like, going into that year, number 5 felt a little high. I mean, obviously, but and that was my first year in College Station, but it was one of those, like, you look around the landscape and you're like, well, who else in terms of proven commodities do you feel better about? So it's like, okay, I guess. And then, that year derailed. Long way to say this year was kind of neat because, 24, I think when they started, I think that surprised some people coming into the year. But I think A&M fans kind of enjoyed, like, after the Jimbo era, just kind of lurking in the shadows and just kind of being that dark horse that people actually aren't talking about. Not the dark horse everyone's hyping up that's like the hot ticket dark horse, but like, just like, it's okay. I understand Tennessee had a good year. Ole Miss, Georgia, Alabama, Texas, like, let them have their shine. We're going to be over here. I think the fans felt really good about the schedule. Very favorable in terms of, the 4 toughest games that you look at coming in were Mizzou, LSU, Texas, and Notre Dame, all of them at home. So I think it was one of those, maybe depending on your optimism of the team, putting that aside, I think you felt like pretty optimistic about the schedule, and like any given game you look at it and you're like, I could see A&M either favored or not more than a 4-point underdog. So you kind of play that game in your head of like, okay, well, maybe it could work out. But again, so much unknowns. Ironically, I think one of the things you felt the best about was, well, we got the quarterback situation settled with Connor Wigman. It's going to be the guy, and that's a strength. So ironically, like, one of the things you were kind of banking on as a thing coming into this hasn't panned out. But I think it was sort of and the game day week 1, that kind of made sense because it was Notre Dame, and maybe that would be like it happened to work out. Like, if you win, it's a big coming out party, and if you lose, it's like, it's okay, no need to panic. But certainly the way it progressed, I think it started to turn once they beat Missouri, and then really once they beat LSU, I think fans started to kind of believe a little bit. 5-0, I think it was for the first time in SEC play. I think 4-0 was the previous best they'd done. So I think once you started to get into that, then it was like, okay, maybe this is our year. But I think most fans, if they're being honest, would tell you it feels like this team, I mean, just the program, right? First year head coach has always been at least a year away from really making some noise. And this is kind of that incremental stepping stone year to potentially, really exciting days ahead.
Yeah, especially with, I look at how Texas had to rebuild when they brought in Sarkisian. And obviously, A&M was actually at a better point as a program for Elko taking over than when Texas was taken over by Sarkisian, just from a roster talent perspective. And you really start to notice culture changes within a program when things are going in the right direction. Obviously, it took Texas that whole first year of Sarkisian was bad. They were in a terrible spot talent-wise. But then year 2, even though they went 8-4, I believe it was, you felt within the program and from everyone who talks from inside the program that things were changing. Then they go to the playoffs the next year. And then obviously this year they followed it up. We could argue whether or not they're a lock for the playoffs. It looks like they're more than likely in, regardless of Saturday. And so it's just hard to imagine them falling out of it. So early on, first off, when we all thought y'all were hiring Mark Stoops, I, as a Texas fan, was ecstatic because that was just going to be an 8-4 every single year for Texas A&M. But when they hired Elko, I thought to myself, that's an actual football coach. And I think that's kind of shown with A&M this year. The quarterback thing you mentioned, I thought Wigman was a surefire deal. If you go back to our early podcasts this year, I mentioned how I thought he was a top NFL prospect, could be one of the top college football quarterbacks, and that fell on its face. But yet they were able to overcome that. And it feels like, and I'm curious of your perspective from the Aggie side, where it feels like inside the program from a culture perspective, because it feels like things are more focused on football rather than kind of the clown show out off the field that was going on under Jimbo, under Sumlin, and previously.
No, totally. And I think Elko played a big part into the dynamic I was just talking about in terms of, you want Texas A&M to be at the forefront, but you don't, like, you do want to kind of maybe take a back seat. And I think Elko kind of fits that mold and has played into that. It's something that was kind of an interesting line item for me is that, like, I always say with college sports, it's a weird deal where, like, perception is reality in a lot of ways, that it's not in the professional ranks. Like, if you all think Jerry Jones is a moron and Mike McCarthy should get fired and they're a clown show, it doesn't really matter in terms of the fan perspective. It's going to matter the decisions being made by the people in the building. And maybe people will be right, maybe people will be wrong, but, like, it doesn't bleed into that. But with A&M or with college, it does. If you have, like, fans on the fence and then donors and giving and NIL and then recruits on the outside are looking, if you're skeptical of the Giants and you get drafted number 2 overall, whatever, like, I don't care if you're skeptical, you're going to play for them. Mm-hmm. So, but college, obviously you build your own roster. So it's kind of
your public perception is much more important at the college ranks than it is. Yeah.
How do you balance, like, almost like and I know he's having a solid year this year, but, like, kind of like what Deion did at Colorado is, like, you pump your chest and you can probably elevate it at a quicker pace than you should be able to. But, does that kind of, is that like a trade-off to where maybe short term you get a few guys in because you're doing that, but then if you disappoint, that could go sideways and that can maybe stall you out a little bit? Like, how do you hit that balance of, like, a healthy culture while also still promoting the program? And I think they've threaded the needle. Again, I think the way the whole schedule thing has worked out has been a very nice part of that. But I think just in general, there were some guys that were let go that I think on paper people would have been surprised by. Not that, like, they came in as highly touted recruits and they weren't huge troublemakers during Jimbo, but you thought, really, I thought they could have used some help there. But I think it was just sort of a reset of, like, hey, and this is an adjustment I think fans are still going to have to go through, not only internally, but externally too, in terms of how you look at A&M. Like, Mike Elko strikes me as the kind of guy, and he's kind of said this, like, they're going to go after and feel better about the high-level 4-star or maybe even the mid-tier 4-star that they think they have a good evaluation on, rather than just, do like fire up CFP 25 and just load it up with as many points on 5 stars as you can, and then it's bound to work out, sort of thing. Yeah. So, like, it's one of the, like, Torian York is, sophomore captain linebacker, and Jimbo brought him in, to be fair, but he's one of those guys that, if you look at their 23 recruiting class, was by all the services rated as one of the lowest rated players and, one of the last players to come in the class because he was kind of a fringe 3-star prospect. And then he's turned out to be one of the most productive. So I think you're going to see A&M try to bring a lot more of those guys in, not just with high school recruiting, with the portal. And it's kind of a thing where you really just have to trust in Mike Elko and see how it works out in terms of, like, you're not really going to be able to, they're not going to bring in the guys. Like, there's a few, Nick Scorton, their edge rusher from Purdue, like, they're still going to get big, high-end talent, but it is going to be a lot about fit and character and kind of, at least early on, I think, trusting, like, okay, like, these guys have know the kids better than we do. They know their system. They know what they're trying to build. And that's much more of the vein of the type of program they're trying to build, rather than just stacking as much raw talent together, even if cohesively from a team chemistry standpoint, it doesn't work out, like even some of, like, the, Big 12 Texas teams that, like, pre-Sarkisian, that were always high up in the recruiting rankings, but you could never figure out why it didn't translate. Like, you're going to see much more of
We're very aware of the
Oh,
exact
yeah.
process you are discussing. That's
Like, they'd rather be like what like Kansas State is in the Big 12.
Mhm.
Solid recruits that overperform rather than just the high-end guys and see if they hit their potential.
Yeah, and it's about player development too. I think that's absolutely huge in terms of getting the. I've always told Jake with Sark, he talks about getting the right recruits, not necessarily just the best guys that have the best measurables and the best highlight reel on Huddle. It's about getting the right guys that is culture fit that is going to develop with the scheme that we have in place. Before we let you go, man, let's get your take on the game this weekend. Where does A&M have success against Texas? Where do you like the matchups for A&M over Texas? And what is the formula? What's it going to look like on Saturday if we come back on here on our immediate reaction show with sad faces? We're depressed. We're just upset because A&M just beat Texas. What's that going to look like?
I think the number one thing, it really starts and ends with me, is pressure on Quinn Ewers. They've had a weird situation where they're a high pressure unit in terms of like percentages and all that and the PFF numbers, but the raw sack numbers haven't always been there. But a lot of times where they've had the pressure, but maybe the sacks haven't, met that mark, is teams like South Carolina with Lenore Sellers or Arkansas with Taylor Green. They even got the Taylor Green a little bit, but Riley Leonard, Notre Dame, and guys that can move Peyton Thorne, guys that can move the pocket and make plays with their feet, extend plays. I don't know, especially with this ankle situation. I know they say he's basically fine, but I mean, Quinn Ewers, just to begin with, even fully healthy, I think is more in line with just a pure pocket passer guy. I know he can move around a little bit, but if that pass rush can get to him and make his life a nightmare, I mean, you're talking about a team that can have a performance. I'm not saying they're as good, but the type of performance like Georgia had against Texas and the O-line, if they're cooking and if they're at their best level, they are capable of that. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but I think that is number one part of the recipe. And, another thing that's been weird lately is their last 3 SEC games, they've started off really slow. If you look at LSU, everyone remembers like they blitzed LSU once they brought in Marcel Reed and they pulled away. And maybe if you didn't watch the first half of the game, you forgot how like dire that game looked for a while.
Mm-hmm.
They did not start great in that game. They go to South Carolina. Now this is where it gets interesting. They fall behind to South Carolina, 14-0. It's not looking great, but then they rally back. They actually take the lead in the first half after digging that hole. And then wheels come off in the second half. And then Auburn, you fall behind 21-0. And they actually take the lead in that game in the fourth quarter, have a drive at the end to get a defensive stop before overtime to end it. So I don't think they're going to have that luxury against Texas. I don't think you can dig yourself a hole like that. I mean, that kind of goes without saying, but I'll be interested because they have shown that ability, even when they're not playing their best, to sort of, ratchet it up and rally back. So if they can just start like relatively even, and we've seen them be able to kind of kick it into gear as the game goes along. I think the longer the game goes on, the more it leans towards A&M, especially with that field at Kyle Field, that atmosphere. I don't think they're going to be able to quite grind out the game and finish off the game, like leaning on their run game if they have like a lead, as they did with Le'Veon Moss, their running back, before he got hurt for the year. So I think that part's going to be a little more dicey, but this is kind of my baseline prediction. I'm too scared to go out on a limb because my head says Texas. You look at all the numbers, the talent, the matchups, like their secondary can be a little shaky at times, A&M, but but then they've got other things working in their favor. I was going to say, and the receivers are really good for Texas. So like that, there's a lot of ways you look at Texas and you're like, okay, they could have success in a lot of areas. But in my mind, if it comes down to it for either team that is trailing by a score with like less than 2 minutes, no timeouts, basically in a situation where it's 4 downs, you're going for it, they score or the game's over. I think whichever team finds itself in that situation will not win. If it's A&M, I think that Texas defense is too good. I think the offense has been a little too inconsistent, and I don't know that they're going to be able to go down and get a game-tying, game-winning drive. But likewise, if A&M has battled the whole game and it comes down to one drive at Kyle Field, and Texas A&M starts to feel like, for those fans, regardless of what outsiders think, if everyone in that stadium feels like this is a maybe not like a season of destiny, but in this moment we're a team of destiny and we are destined to win this game, I don't know that the Longhorns are going to be able to go down, drive the field, tie the game, take the lead, etc. So basically, my hard and fast prediction is whoever's leading going into that last possession, I think we'll be able to get that last stop to close out the game.
Jake, any last questions, comments, concerns before we let Ben go?
No, it's just funny to hear the other perspective because, like you and I discussed in our predictions, we both are very nervous about this game. We have a respect for Texas A&M football we quite frankly have not ever had before with this season. I think Elko's a good coach. I think A&M is a good football team. I think they have a defense that's capable of doing some of the things you said. And I think, we both predicted a Texas win, but, I said my confidence percentage on a scale of 0 to 100 was about 52 to 55%. So if that tells you the respect that I do have, as much as I have clowned A&M at times,
it's our job. It's our job as rivals.
On this podcast, I do have a respect for the football team that is the 2024 Texas A&M Aggies.
Yeah, it was a real bummer to have you on because I was hoping you'd be a little bit more delusional and crazy, and you've been very rational. And I'm like, what's going on here? This is not the A&M Twitter that I know and love.
Right. Well, if it explains it. So for those that don't know, I did not go to A&M. I'm not an Aggie, but I work out here at the NBC station covering A&M at College Station. But actually, my sister, I mentioned going to Austin. She went to grad school at UT. Met my brother-in-law there, her husband. And so I'm going to be spending Thanksgiving with her and her dog, and her dog's got like the jersey and all this. So they are diehard Longhorns. So maybe that explains some of it.
Yeah. Well, we definitely appreciate having you on, man. And be sure to tune in to All In Aggies. We're going to do a crossover as well, and we'll jump on the podcast with Ben, and he will host us as his guest when we go behind enemy lines. So make sure you tune in to both of those. Ben, we appreciate having you, man.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Yep. All right. That is Ben Peck with All In Aggies. He gave us a little inside look as to kind of what it feels and what we can expect from Texas A&M. And kind of like we've talked about, man, that crowd and that atmosphere, that environment is going to be like no other. It is a Super Bowl type event for that program. And right now they're in playoff mode. They have to win. They have to win in the SEC championship, and to even have a postseason hope of getting in. And so they're in playoff mode right now.
Well, and for them, it's the difference between an 8-4 season, which I feel like at the start of the season, A&M fans would have been, okay, 8-4. It's not a bad first year for Elko. But now with the stakes at play in this last game, it probably changes their perspective. And 8-4 would feel like such a letdown for how they started.
Right.
To end with 3 out of 4 losses in the last 4 games. And for Texas, it's, do you want to put your playoff hopes in the hands of the committee? And having to go to College Station, it is a great football environment. It's going to be an unreal. I mean, I can't fathom in my mind how loud, how toxic, and how insane this environment is going to be on Saturday. And
you add that, and I'm really looking forward to game day with Schloss as the guest speaker. That's gonna be.
I don't think that's actually. I don't think he's actually. The guest
that's
speaker.
not actually.
That was a troll, but
that would have been fantastic if they would have.
Yeah, I don't think game day has the gall to try to pull that one.
To pull a Texas Longhorn coach as their guest speaker.
It is going to be one of the craziest environments in the history of college football.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, this is not a statewide game this time, like this rivalry typically has been. This is a national game with national implications, with SEC implications, with playoff implications. It's bigger than I think we could have ever imagined at the start of the year, other than if they were going to play this week and then play again next week, which we obviously know is not going to be the case.
Right. Jake, real quick, let's go ahead and wrap up the show with an article released by in the Players Tribune by CJ Baxter. Had a really big sentiment about the Texas program, about his injury going into the season, hearing that pop of his Achilles, and it'll kind of just putting a synopsis of what it is like being recruited by Texas, being part of this Texas program, and the culture that has been built by Texas players like Jordan Whittington, by players like Bijan Robinson, and like coaches like Tashard Choice, the running backs coach, and what that's been like with his experience and his recovery and coming back. What was your overall takeaway from his article that he put out?
First off, what a just grown man article from him. I mean, just giving his thoughts, sounding mature beyond his years. And I think all Longhorns were already a CJ Baxter fan, but no one had seen this side of him yet. And to see this, I mean, when he comes back, he's going to get a standing ovation when he takes the field with this type of thing. Cause for me, it just really nails down everything I believe about the culture that Steve Sarkisian has set for Texas is truly there, and the players feel it. And it's not only a coach-led culture, but it's a player-led culture. And he talks about that in the article. If you have not read it, please take the 5 to 10 minutes it will take to go and read it. It is worth every second of it. You might feel like some onions are getting cut around you, or you might feel like you want to run through a brick wall, or a little bit of both. I did just want to mention he listed 3 lessons that he's learned at Texas. And I just wanted to say those on the podcast, which was lesson 1, don't complain and poison the locker room. Earn your spot on the depth chart. The ego can ultimately be too much for some guys. And if it is, there's the door. And that can relate to a lot of things in the Texas program. And that can relate to some departures we saw this year. Lesson 2, you have a huge microscope on you at all times, and how you act around others leaves an impression. If how you represent yourself and the team doesn't mean anything to you, there's the door. And then lesson 3, never quit on a play, never quit on anything, which then he talks about the Whittington play at TCU. And I just think those lessons he mentions and how he sat down with Whittington and how he sat down with some of these previous Texas players from last year, Bijan as well, really shows, regardless of the results Saturday, regardless that this program is in the right spot to be a consistent team on a year-to-year basis, where hopefully we can get back to that Mac Brown era where winning 10 games is the standard and the expectation from a season in and season out perspective.
No, I completely agree. And it's a great article. Highly recommend. Again, it's on the Players Tribune. CJ Baxter released it. And yeah, very, very insightful and heartfelt as to kind of his ups and downs of realizing he was injured, realizing that his season was over, but the support and him just saying, look, I'm in the right place, man. This is exactly where I am meant to be. This is where I'm supposed to be, is the running back for the Texas Longhorns. And I think the come up and the comeback for next season is going to be even better and than maybe we would ever expected. He is on path to make a full recovery. We're excited to have him back next season. And it'll be again, it's one of those culture players that we are starting to see it being handed down from class to class. We're starting to see Jordan Whittington break it down to Bijan, from Bijan to CJ, from CJ to, who knows, Arch Manning. I don't know. And it'll just go down. We'll have staple players. And you see that at every level, man. You've seen it with the major programs that have had success. And you constantly ask yourself, you're like, man, why do these programs, why don't they ever go away? Why doesn't an Alabama ever go away? It's because the culture is not within the coaching staff. It's within the players and the players believing in one another and teaching the younger class how to lead that way. And it just keeps repeating itself over and over again. And that's really what the article dives into without it being said so obviously. You can just get the feel from it. And so CJ Baxter, obviously knowing where his roots come from, and he lays it all out there. And so a great article, highly recommend the read.
Yeah, if you're Steve Sarkisian, you're showing this to recruits, you're showing this article to the players on the team, making sure everyone reads it and go, this is what bought in looks like. He's bought in and he's not even getting to play the games right now.
And when you're talking about recruits, you're talking about, hey, read this article, mom and dad. Read this article, grandma, grandpa. Like, this is where your son is going. This is where your son, your boy is going to turn into a man. in 4 years. And I think it's a great piece, kind of an inside look at the eyes through a Texas Longhorn recruit, and then the eyes through a Texas Longhorn current player and a leader, and will soon be an upperclassman as well. So very, very insightful, very good article. Again, highly recommend reading it. Steve Sarkisian did already retweeted on his X. He gave him the hook'em and gave I think one of those emojis, the heart emojis. And so shout out to Coach Sark to give his own player some flowers as well. And what an article to come out right before Texas A&M week. I mean, if that doesn't pump you up as a player, I don't know what will.
Yeah, and how he ends the article too. The blueprint is there. Now it's time to execute. Go out there and get one for your brother. Sincerely, CJ. Yeah. And the way he ends that, it's like you could have put this article out pretty much at any time in the last multiple weeks, but he waited until the A&M game to try to just give any extra boost he can, because the team's going to need it going into this environment. And he is going to be probably one of the leaders speaking to the locker room before that game, I would imagine, after this.
Any last words before we log off, Jake? Again, everybody, make sure you tune in to All In Aggies as well. Ben is going to release an episode with us on it as his guest. So we're doing some crossover episodes, a lot of good fun between Texas A&M and Texas Longhorn media people, as well as the players and these football programs. It's a fun week. We look forward to it. Again, happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy this time with your family. If you can manage 30, 40 minutes to spend with us, we definitely appreciate that as well. It does not go unnoticed. Again, these episodes drop Monday or Tuesday through Friday at noon, and then on Saturday immediately following the game. Again, appreciate the love, support, like, share, subscribe. We are thankful for you, our listeners, and our repeating listeners that come back and spread the word. And as always, welcome.
All In Sports Network. We love sports.